as speechwriters do after the debate and say what he should have said. First of all, it's very Donald Trump. He read something. This is the most colorful thing that he read. It made an impression and he repeated it. I agree, he shouldn't. The memes coming out are really attacking the media, pretending there's no problem. All is well in Springfield.
They doubled down on it, which is they should have said, maybe the cats and dogs thing, we'll figure it out if it's true or not. But the larger point is there's 30,000, 20,000 Haitian immigrants that were dropped on this poor community that is anyway suffering. When you brought 100 people to Martha's Vineyard, they were kicked out within 2 days.
Right.
So just maybe think about that.
That's a good point. A rich community, they don't have the problem because they ship them out.
Exactly.
Or they live in
gated
buildings with doormen and guards and stuff. People in Springfield don't live like that.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we're in New York. We're continuing our series of New York's conversations. Today, we're honored to have Bill McGurn. He's a columnist, an important columnist at the Wall Street Journal, which we're doing cooperation with our paper, Globes, with the Wall Street Journal. We work a lot and use a lot of their articles. And so we have a very good relationship with the paper. And Bill has also held positions, which we'll talk about, in the Bush administration. And he edited the Far East Review, if I'm not mistaken, so he knows a lot about China. And we'll get into that hopefully when time allowance. So Bill, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So Bill, I want to talk to you. We're in New York. We are recording this. I don't know when we'll publish it, but we're recording this not too long ago after another assassination attempt on the former president, and maybe one of the two people who will be the next president. And it seems to me, before we get into any of the Gaza stuff and all that, which I wanted to talk to you before, but just off the bat, where are we in America with this, hatred, polarization? Have you ever seen it like this in the past, since the 60s, maybe?
I don't think I've seen this so much. On the other hand, I would caution about seeing it as too much of an exception. If you go back to the Lincoln-Douglas debates and you read them, the papers published accounts and the papers were biased and they would put in all insults and stuff. So,
there was really serious insults there.
And Truman, some things he said. So I think there's a strong tradition of this in a free society. Unfortunately, sometimes you get a lot of excess. And so, yes, I think both Trump is unique in the passions he arouses, both among supporters and detractors. And I think it's not quite as unique in history as we may think.
But one maybe pushback on that is that, at least let's go to Israel for a second, because maybe it illustrates this. When I was growing up, or even in the last 15, 20 years, one of the main things that we Israelis talked about was the importance of having bipartisan support for Israel. And it seems to me that Israel has become, for different reasons, a totally partisan issue on a lot of the issues. For example, you have just the language being spoken about. So on the Republican side, you'll have almost everyone saying Israel needs to destroy Hamas. On the Democrat side, you have Kamala Harris yesterday saying we need to end the war in Gaza. The language is being used totally different, and there's reasons for why that is, but I think it does show that, and we'll get into this, why that is, but I think there is something that it shows that the polarization is very different.
That aspect certainly is. Yeah. I think most Americans were probably shocked that how do I put this? It seems that the higher you go in education and the more elite the institution, the more pronounced the anti-Semitism. And I'm not sure when these Columbia students are shouting from the river to the sea, do they fully appreciate what that means? I think the people that are organizing and whip them up understand.
They know.
But there's a lot of that out there, and it's appalling. And what's worse is we have a failure of nerve by the leaders, by, say, the university leaders. They go to Washington. They can't condemn empty statements. You know,
not only that, they're called genocide. They're
right.
being asked, is it illegal or is it against policy in your schools to call for the genocide of Jews?
Right.
And they're like, no, it depends on the context. What
right.
context do you call genocide?
Right. And as for the shift, it's interesting because Republicans weren't always the party of Israel.
Yes.
I think Nixon came through for Israel, though he's not considered pro-Israel, right? But he came through at a crucial moment. When they needed him. And I think Reagan was instinctively pro-Israel, but his State Department and appointees, a lot of Arabists, George H.W. Bush had a lot of Arabist kind of inclinations. And the president I work for, Judge W. Bush, was very pro-Israel. But I think it was less about Republicans, what they did to become pro-Israel. I think it was more Israel became one of the leading villains on the left. The ideology that saw them as colonizers and occupiers. And it really was demonized. It is demonized by the left. And before that was not true. I mean, the founding fathers were socialists
of Israel.
In many ways, they were not radical left.
The Soviet Union voted for Israel in the UN. Yeah,
left of center heroes, and that's totally reversed itself.
Bill, let's get into that a little bit. So October 7th happens, and on October 8th, right where we're sitting, pretty much in Times Square, you have Israel is still reeling from the attack. I was there. We didn't really know still exactly what had happened. We just knew that lots of people are dead. We didn't know the number. We knew that from the videos of Hamas. We knew that people were being kidnapped. We did not know how many, the extent. We didn't know what was happening. We knew there were still terrorists walking around in the south. It took about a week to push them back and kill whoever was inside of Israel already. So no one knew the extent of what was happening. And Israel obviously did not respond yet because they were still working on kicking the terrorists out of Israel. So we obviously did not start bombing Gaza in a serious way. And yet one day after, here in Times Square and in other places in the U.S., you had huge protests against Israel and, frankly, Hamas flags. So supporting also Hamas, a lot of these people, like you said, from the river to the sea, but even things that are way more explicit, death to the Jews you had all these different things. And the fact is that if I remember back, people were not condemning it the way that I think you should. And you see also the administration, which is all the time connecting the anti-Semitism to the Islamophobia. They'll never say the Biden administration, Harris administration, they'll never say just anti-Semitism is bad. They'll always say anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. If it was the other way around, it seems to me that they'll for sure just say Islamophobia. Yeah. Where do you think... First of all, how do you see what happened here? As someone who grew up, I'm totally in shock of just looking back. And number two, the Democrat Party seems to be hijacked, at least in large parts of it, by this sort of willingness to be apologetic to these crazies.
Yeah, I look at it this way. If on October 6th, you told me that Hamas would launch an attack planned to attack grandmothers, babies, children, unarmed people in their homes, and they would be, Israel would be the villain. If you told me that, I think if you told most Americans that
they'd be in shock.
On October 6th, they'd say that's ridiculous. So, not only was it disgusting, it was really shocking in a way, this turn of things, because get back to what terrorist is. It's an attack on civilians. Yes. Really, the fundamental distinction is between terrorists and a soldier is targeting for attack unarmed civilians. And terrorists target them. A terrorist organization is like an organized conspiracy of war criminals, right? Because they're violating the most basic rule of war. And the idea that this could be celebrated or excused in any way, I think is preposterous. And it's I don't know that all Democrats go along with this because at the fringes, but there should be more forceful condemning it. I mean, Joe Biden, I think, belonged to my part of America. In other words, saying this is, no one would say this stuff initially on October 6th and even October 8th. He was saying good things.
He came to Israel the next week.
Yeah, I think he's watered down and moved closer to that both sides kind of paradigm. But it's shocking how people have given up the basic distinction between terrorists and a soldier.
But why do you think, for example, one of the things, I think you wrote about it also in one of your pieces at the Journal, but that they're basically losing both sides a lot of times. They're disappointing. For example, Biden gives a speech at the DNC. And first of all, they moved him to like 12 o'clock at night because they don't want anyone to remember that he's still the president and that he has anything to do with the nominee. And well, I'll ask you about that just in general. But so he gives a speech, and at one point he goes off script and he says the protesters outside have a point. And my question is, what is the point? What are you saying that they have a point? Do they have a point when they say from the river to the sea? Do they have a point when they're waving Hamas flags? Do they have the point when they're basically calling Israel a war criminal? What is the point that he thinks? Not that I'm not sure he goes really deep into, but instinctively, Biden has always been, maybe you'll agree with me, always to the center of where the Democrats are. He was for the crime bill in the 90s, and he moved all the way to where they are now. And he feels, I guess, instinctively that the base wants him to say they have a point. The base feels sympathy towards these protesters. Why do they feel sympathy toward these protesters? Why is this so difficult to say, no, they don't have a point?
Well, I think what he would say, they have a point that there are too many Palestinian casualties, but that kind of raises the question: who's responsible? Traditionally, just war teaching. If I use you as a shield, I'm responsible for your death. And we've been unwilling to do that. And there should be more about that. I mean, that's another October 6th thing, that if you said Hamas would see more Palestinian casualties as a plus for them, a PR plus, and hide behind these people and be willing to sacrifice them so they get a nice picture in the New York Times or goes around the world, I think people would be shocked. And I think Joe Biden was really shocked, and he gave good statements at the beginning. Unfortunately, I think they've moved to the ceasefire. And they don't have a logic for it. It just sounds good for peace. I think most Americans, if it weren't Hamas, if any other enemy, and you launch an attack like that, you would say, as the Prime Minister of Israel says, we can't rest until we no longer have this threat. Doesn't mean they have to kill every single one, but it means they have to eliminate them as a threat.
Capacity.
And I believe war is so brutal and hellish. The faster you do this, the less suffering there is. And Hamas believes, look at the hostages. We all agree taking civilian hostages is gross. It's such a violation, but it works. It's the best. Why would they give it up? If I were Hamas and I thought the way Hamas does, I would never give them up or only trickle them out, a few at a time, because that's my total leverage.
Their insurance.
There was stands between Hamas and the IDF. So why would I give them up? I think, unfortunately, the war is proving that hostage taking is effective in these kind of asymmetrical battles between a terrorist organization and the state.
100%. And also, I would just add, and tell me what you think about this, that when the Biden administration puts public pressure on Israel to give more concessions in the negotiations for the hostage and ceasefire and all that, Hamas sees it.
Yes.
You work for an economic newspaper. incentives work.
Yes.
And so when they see that the more they hold out, the more pressure is being leveraged on the other side, they'll hold out more because they'll get more concessions, they feel. So there's no reason for them to come to in goodwill to the negotiating table when they're anyway America's doing their job for them in pressuring Israel.
I agree with that. And I believe it also gives Benjamin Netanyahu an incentive really not to listen to the U.S. and stuff, because my suspicion, I have no inside knowledge, is that the prime minister sees this and he says, okay, the world's against me. The U.S. is not going to support me. I have to do what needs to be done. And when it is done, then I'll be in a position to negotiate, but not before. And that's a tough position.
Do you think also we're coming to an election, and I'm going to ask you just where you think things are, but before that, what would be first of all, are you scared that if, let's say in a month, the polls would show that Trump is really in the lead? Just theoretically, I don't think that'll happen because I think we're such a close, polarized country. But if America's enemies and Israel's enemies, because we basically have the same enemies, think that the administration will change, that would be in danger of them trying to get in attacks before Trump comes into office?
That's definitely a possibility. But on the other hand, they could fear, he's not stupid. If you do an attack a month before, he might still take it as a swipe against them. So look, from an American point of view, we have what we didn't have. We have a belligerent Iran, Russia causing trouble, China threatening Taiwan, and North Korea. So we have a lot of problems. And there are also, we're talking so far about Israel and and Hamas. They're not isolated. They're all watching what Israel does and what America does. And they're going to make conclusions from that. It's no secret, it's no coincidence that Putin really went into Ukraine after he saw Afghanistan and the humiliating U.S. withdrawal that Biden oversaw. So I think it's a very dangerous time. My sense of the Biden administration is they look at the world as something to be managed. No change in the status quo.
But everything changed, Bill.
Yes, but I come from, but that gives all the momentum.
Yes.
You're reacting always to them. And the same way with Putin in Ukraine. I'm a believer in the Reagan doctrine. Early on in this administration, I think he was talking with a friend, and they were all talking about the theories of the Soviet Union. And he said, I have a simple idea. We win, they lose. And I want Israel to win, and I want Ukraine to win. And to the extent we can help, I think we should.
Let's now talk about the state of the race. Where do you think we are? We had the debate between Harris and Trump. I think it's generally, I don't think you come to another conclusion, but that Trump was irritated by the attack on his rally sizes. And, a lot of Republicans seem to be blaming the moderators, which is true. The moderators were, I think, very, very biased. But on the other hand, any sensible person who was good at debating would have been able to even use the moderators' antagonism towards him as a plus. Republicans tend to like fighting against the media if they do it in a smart way, but he didn't do it. He got very, very rattled by her crowd size reference and all these different kind of things. He was very combative. There's so much to attack her on, and he didn't do it. And so I think the consensus is that he lost the debate. So, and he says he's not doing another debate. So that's where we are now. The polls seem to be moving a little bit towards her since there, but it's not like 10 points difference. The states that are important are still close, it seems to me. And so we're going towards the election. Where do you think we are right now?
Well, first the debate. I agree with your assessment. I was watching it with my wife. Going into the debate, Trump had a legitimate complaint that Kamala Harris wasn't answering questions And worse than that, I mean, that's a natural thing for a candidate to want, right? I don't want any tough questions.
Yeah.
But worse than that, the press didn't seem much interested in getting her to answer or demanding it. So the debate was his opportunity to define Kamala Harris and get her to take responsibility for the Biden administration and the policies, which are very unpopular, and to define herself by some of her old stands. I'll give you an example. The first question was from the moderators was a good one. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago before Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office? And she hemmed and hawed and so forth.
She said she was from the middle class.
Right.
Nothing to do with the question.
Nothing to do. You would think Donald Trump would say she didn't answer the question. So I'll answer it. No, they're not better off.
Exactly.
Inflation has outstripped wage growth and everything. There's a lot of issues, but he missed that. And, he let Kamala Harris, who is not thought to be good at debates. Remember, he kept telling us how stupid she was before she debated. He set a low bar, and he let her kind of smile on camera while he started fulminating. When she made the crack about people leaving his rallies early, my wife said, "Oh," and from there he
went
was
downhill.
going, and he looked angry and not in control of himself. He got some good punches in.
The last point I think of his was good. He should have said at the beginning,
right,
that you're not better off when referring to going. She didn't do anything, and all this kind of stuff. That's how you lead the debate. You don't finish it when everybody already shut the TVs.
But that said, I think he did lose the debate.
Yes.
Debates, are overrated in how far they move the polls. And I think there's some evidence that Kamala Harris didn't really improve her standing with independents and the voters she needs. And it marginally, maybe half by point in the Real Clear Politics average of the polls, but very small. So it was for Trump, it was a missed opportunity. For Kamala Harris, I think she gave her party some sense of relief. She didn't embarrass herself, didn't collapse, so a lot more confidence after that.
So basically you're saying is that everything stayed the same, pretty much.
A little bump to her, I think.
But it'll wear off over time.
It'll wear off. She's kind of stayed where she is. Both of them, problem, it seems to me, have kind of peaked. And they have the voters that would naturally come to them. What they need is other voters. And that's been Trump's challenge all along. His base maybe gives him 44%, but he needs more to win.
Do you think that, that a lot of I saw after the debate, a lot of Republicans, let's say people who aren't Trumpsters, not MAGA country people, wrote, if we would have picked DeSantis, he would have destroyed her. If we would have picked Nikki Haley, she would have destroyed her. You were stuck with this. Do you think, in retrospect, obviously the base loves Trump, but if for some reason he wouldn't have been the candidate, that it would have been a much different race in the sense that the Republicans would have the upper hand in a larger way? I mean, hindsight is 20/20, obviously, but it seems to me that just in terms of the debating skills and in terms of getting specific, he's very bad at it. He speaks in very generalities always, but now it's more important because you're pointing out their bad policies. You need to get a little more specific. Do you think there's any truth to that?
There might be. I had hoped DeSantis would win the nomination. For substantive reasons, I think DeSantis is closer to the pro-free trade views that I'm not a protectionist.
Yes, we're going to talk about that later.
And stuff, so forth. So, I would have preferred him for that, but the people chose Donald Trump. And so that's kind of a futile exercise. And also one of the problems with saying, DeSantis or Nikki Haley, would do better. They're kind of assuming they would have Trump's level of support and add to it. It's not clear they would have Trump's level of support.
You're saying that some people that are supporting Trump would maybe not vote because he gets a lot of these new voters that traditionally Republicans didn't get. For example, in the Rust Belt states where you got a lot of working class people that Republicans traditionally didn't really do well with them. But on the other hand, he's losing suburban women and all this kind of stuff. So we don't know. It's very unknown. Also, do you think the second assassination attempt does anything? Well, first of all, we have to say that it's amazing. Tell me if you agree with me or not. I see some of this Trump gets twice tried to shoot at him. And the second time, you see people saying, there's these things people are saying, it's Trump's fault. Lester Holt.
The New York Times had an editorial basically saying that.
I don't understand how the logic works here. So Trump gets shot at, and they're saying it's because he said the cats and the dogs in Springfield, Ohio. So how do you explain this like knee-jerk reaction to basically say it's his fault he got shot at?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's part of American politics. They all want to blame the other side for that. Look, they call Trump Hitler and a fascist, but he's called Kamala Harris communist and left-wing.
Comrade.
And so forth. So, as I said, I think that's part of American history. What's troubling to me is that two troubled men, and one very young and so forth, neither, I think, without real military training or any special expertise, were able to get so close to the president, and in the first case, fire off shots
and hit him.
That killed someone
and hit the president in the ear.
Second, thanks to a Secret Service agent, interrupted before. But the fact that they're able to outwit what should be the premier protective service in the world, that's really scary. And what's scary both, that I think people on both sides should be worried about, if Trump were assassinated, the effect on the body politic would be horrendous. There's theory, and there's a book out that kind of said the left kind of turned on America after Kennedy was assassinated, with the idea that it was because America was corrupt that they assassinated John Kennedy. And something like that would certainly happen if Donald Trump were assassinated. What his people, they'd say the FBI was against him.
They're already saying
this establishment. So it would poison our politics for such a long time. It would obviously not be good for Donald Trump, but it would not be good for anyone.
Yeah, and we saw America seems to be I think what you said in the beginning, I tend to disagree. I think we are in a place that's very dangerous, because you said over the years the rhetoric.
No, I think it's dangerous, but I think we've seen really harsh rhetoric.
Right, in the past, but not in the past.
Well, the difference, I think, is that in the past, like Lincoln Douglas debates, you may read them like a week or 2 weeks after in the paper. Today we have social media, and they can take words and attach images to them, and it goes all around the world. And people that don't know the core, the news of the story, they get it mixed in with all the setup and the images, and it can really have a distorting effect, and it has a frenzied effect. When you read what Stephen Douglas says 2 weeks after, you might be mad, but it's not the same as having a whole group riled up because Twitter or Instagram sent out some kind of
it's more instant, and it's larger,
more passionate,
and also social media tends to get you like it's like,
and it's visual, so it plays on emotions a lot more.
So you mentioned the free trade. Trump put on the tariffs in the first administration. His vice president now is the candidate for his vice president is very much a protectionist. The way he speaks, the way he's going out there in interviews and basically defending putting more tariffs on lots of different goods. Where do you think the Republican Party is in terms of the base seems to support it? But maybe it's just because they love Trump, like you said. So where do you think, first of all, maybe explain to our listeners and viewers why free trade is important? Because I think it's something that we tend to just walk past. The free trade is good, but why is it good?
Well, at the basic level, if you're in another country, Israel, if you produce something that's better and cheaper than what I produce, the other person pays a price for getting something that's not better or not cheaper. And if he's getting it for business, it hurts his business either by making it inferior or more expensive to get it. That said, my education really came from living in Hong Kong for 10 years. No protectionism. And I saw what that, in terms of the opportunity, the idea that we can protect a factory from foreign competition, I think is ridiculous without considering the cost. Like, you protect steel, then the price goes up and makes other industries like auto manufacturing that less competitive because they're paying a price for steel. And I saw that vividly in Hong Kong. What is the best thing for workers? I call it the security of opportunity. You cannot guarantee that factory is going to be there in 20 years, and also we have this false image, that you're going to enter a factory when you're 19 and work until 65. And nothing's going to basically do the same job. And I think the economy is not like that. It's kind of based, I think in America, the World War II model, after World War II, there was such pent-up demand that you could basically manufacture anything and people would buy it. And, America's making cars, Ford. There's really no competition in the world. Then no one else is making it at a level.
The Koreans weren't there yet.
Yeah. So now that's changed. So I think for workers, the real guarantee is what I call the security of opportunity. You want to be able to leave your job and take another one at equal or higher pay at the drop of a hat. When I was in Hong Kong, I think the unemployment rate was 2.7%. And what it meant is that people would switch jobs, secretaries, for the equivalent of $10 a week. So they had to be treated nicely. The only time workers have leverage is when there are more jobs. The only time you can tell your boss, take this job and shove it, is when you can get another job. And that was something I lived through in Hong Kong and saw. And I think this protectionism is taking us down the wrong road. And you look at Europe. Is Europe more competitive because it has doesn't have protectionism between European countries, but with the outside world? I don't think that's a route we should go, and I don't think it's American in tradition. It's what makes us dynamic in the world. A company that is competitive at home and competitive in global markets is going to do well. That's the kind of company you want to work for.
So, so now you explain why it's smart to have free trade and free markets in general, because free trade is between countries, free markets are inside the countries. Right. So, but the current the presidential candidate for the Republican Party, which traditionally was a party of free trade, at least in the past 40, 50 years, pretty much more or less, and free markets, is suddenly, He first of all, in his first administration, he did do tariffs on steel, aluminum, if I remember correctly, and different things like that. And he's saying that he will do it in even more serious terms if he's elected again. And his vice presidential candidate wrote about it as before he was a senator and then after he was a senator. So where do you think, first of all, are you worried by this trend that the Republican Party seems to be going on? And where do you think it stems from?
Well, I do worry about it. I think it's largely Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that when he leaves the political scene, the force for it kind of bows out. I'm not sure Donald Trump really wants, the 20% across. What does he want? I think what he thinks of it as is, you're a factory owner in Ohio.
Yeah.
And you're going to close down your factory and open one in Mexico. And he wants, I think his idea is he'll call you up. Hi, this is the president of the United States. I really wish you wouldn't move that factory then they decide they better not, and he's a hero. I think that's more kind of like what he has in mind. I think he thinks jobs can really be saved over time with that. I don't think that's possible. I think it's also leads to a side issue. I think like J.D. Vance and many others who are trying to turn Trump into a philosophy or ideology.
Trumpism
is they fail at it because I don't think it's it's more instincts. Now, a lot of his instincts I agree with. He's on the side of Israel, so he wants them to win.
He's on the side of America.
Yeah, he wants a strong military force. So I think a lot of his instincts are conservative. I don't think they amount to a real philosophy.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems to me that what is the Trumpism? And everybody has a different thing. So you'll have Tucker Carlson on the one hand sitting with him in the box. His Trumpism is totally different from, let's say, Tom Cotton's Trumpism, who's Tucker says we shouldn't do anything of foreign policy. Tom Cotton wants to help our allies, Israel, Ukraine, and all that. So everybody takes from it what they think is
exactly
what they anyway thought,
and they're all going to be unlucky.
Exactly.
I mean, to compare it to the guy who had the most coherent philosophy, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
He had a free trade philosophy, free market, and he was able to explain it. A lot of time when he talked about inflation, he said, Democrats this is in his time. He said, Democrats, tell you we have inflation because you're living too well. And he said, inflation is not a sign you're living too well. It's a sign the government is living too well. He was just a genius in taking these complicated free market messages and putting them out in a way that people could understand the basic common sense.
Also, if we go to the other side for a second, although I find it's interesting to talk to you about the right and the changes because you've lived through them, is that you've been around a long time in politics and writing about what's happening. It seems to me the right moved where we've been saying it's moving. We're hoping it'll come back to free market principles more than it is now. But the left seems to be moving, to have moved. We've mentioned a little bit, but I'm talking now internally. We talked about Israel, but now I'm talking about just as America, the way they view America. The base of the Democrat Party seems to be 100% different from, let's say, JFK or even Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Bill Clinton, if I remember correctly, you were here. I was way younger.
Right.
When Gingrich became the speaker, he moved to the center.
Right.
He was the deficits he controlled.
Right.
He was he had an entire strategy of becoming a centrist. And the party today is not even remotely, it's not even an option for them. They're totally on the left, and sometimes they'll come to the center, a little bit less of a left, but they're always on the left, and they're always looking to be more left. So we're in New York now. You have this cashless bail thing. You have just on the domestic, not even talking about economics, but cashless bail. You'll have this whole DEI thing where basically they're judging people by their skin color. Mm-hmm. Which is something that I've never heard, you never could have dreamed of 15 years ago. Just people being accepted to schools because they're born black, born white, born Asian. You had the Supreme Court case that talked about it. The schools were defending it. The administration was defending this practice. So what do you think happened to them?
I don't know. I mentioned before, there is a theory that the left changed its views of America in wake of Kennedy's assassination. It was no longer, the pay any price, bear any burden, the city of the land of opportunity. And now you have that playing. It's taken a long time to play out, but you have it in the idea, the 1619 Project,
slavery,
where slavery defines America. I think what defines America vis-a-vis slavery, which most every society had at one point or another, is that we got rid of it.
Yes. A whole civil war.
And many lives were sacrificed to get rid of it. And obviously slavery was a blight on the founding of America, and the founders knew it, but they thought they had enough. That was for another generation. And they clearly thought it would die out and so forth. And they put it off. But I think the left is just can't see good, all structural racism. That's what they see, bias, no opportunity. For example, African Americans, an economist named Glenn Laurie just pointed out blacks in America have a higher standard of living than blacks anywhere else, including all black countries, or countries run by black leaders. Black leaders. So I think that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that a lot of opportunity, and I would say this is a warning for the right, but first I'll talk about the left. The free market is important. And the Democratic Party, my colleague Dan Henninger, I think it might have been during the Clinton years, he wrote a column on the Democratic Convention, how there's so few of its leaders that are tethered to the free market. Yes. They all work in nonprofits or government. You just don't know any businessmen or something. And that's continued apace. Like Joe Biden, maybe a stint at a law firm, but what other experience? The private sector is something to them to be taxed, to be regulated, to be strangled, to be forced to do things. It's never good. Kamala Harris, for example, talked about her job as a college student at McDonald's. And she joined a protest in 2019 for the McDonald's wages to go up, the fight for 15. Never did you hear one word from her praising McDonald's. I mean, 1 out of 8 Americans has worked at McDonald's.
1 out of 8 Americans?
1 out of 8. Wow. And what it teaches, look, they can teach anyone to flip a hamburger. I worked at McDonald's. But what they teach you is the importance of showing up on time, the soft skills that make people employable. And a lot of people got them at McDonald's. You never hear anything like that. So they've kind of forgotten the private sector for that. And for Republicans, I would say when you think of parties on the right, especially in Europe, when they don't have the free market, they tend to degenerate and lose their optimism. And becomes a bitter war. And they become very marginalized, like monarchists in France or something. Very monarch. So they they don't have anything to offer the people except a vision that maybe only 5% accept. And I think it's the belief in free markets that teaches us possibility is real, hope is real, opportunity is real. And if you don't have that, you get very grim very fast.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. One thing I would say that was interesting was that at the DNC, you had Bernie Sanders giving a speech, and he's like, all the billionaires, they're reaping us and raping our, all the companies the corporations they're the evil ones, and then he finishes, and the next guy is Pritzker. And he's a billionaire.
Right.
And he says, oh, take it from me. Donald Trump isn't a good billionaire. I'm the good billionaire. It's a very weird dynamic. It also goes to show that everything's very tribal with them.
Right.
So they hate billionaires, but if you're a good billionaire on our side, so Soros, the son now.
And no one ever President Obama has 4 houses.
Yes. Bernie has 3.
Could he have some migrants in them? If he was Republican, sure they'd be calling for him.
Yes.
But if you're a Democrat, who was the rock star that was lecturing Springfield, Ohio, from his mansion in L.A.? Springfield is a small town. It's a dogs and cats town that Trump brought up. A small town, Ohio, I think 60,000 people. They dropped 20,000 Haitians, people from the poorest nation in the continent, in the Western Hemisphere. And I think the larger import was not whether dogs are being eaten or something. But this pretense that there's no problems with assimilation or anything, that these people should be quiet instead of complaining. And that's why a lot of ordinary Americans think the elites are out of touch.
Which is, by the way, another that's so annoying is that you don't have to go to the dogs and cats, which may or may not be true. The larger point is much better and much stronger.
Yes, that's
which
Trump.
Is so bad at the messaging. You, as a speechwriter in the past, you could, I think, appreciate how you have so much things that are 100% true. You don't have to go to these weird theories that may or may not be true. We'll see. But, it's contentious. Why? You could bring up Laken Riley, who was murdered.
In fairness, he is in the middle of debate, and it's always easier to second guess, as speechwriters do, after the debate and say what he should have said. I think it's one of those things, first of all, it's very Donald Trump. He read something. This is the most colorful thing that he read. It made an impression and he repeated it. I agree you shouldn't. That's just part of Donald. But I think I don't think it's damaged him as much because everyone jumped on the fact check and they're kind of, the memes coming out are really attacking the media, pretending there's no problem. All is well in Springfield.
Yeah, but what I do think is that he should have, obviously it's second guessing, but they doubled down on it, which is they should have said, maybe the cats and dogs thing, we'll figure it out if it's true or not. But the larger point is there's 30,000, 20,000 Haitian immigrants that were dropped on this poor community that is anyway suffering. It's not a rich place. When you brought 100 people to Martha's Vineyard, they were kicked out within 2 days. Right. So just maybe think about that.
That's a good point. Like a rich community, they don't have the problem because they ship them out. Exactly. Or they live in
gated
buildings with doormen and guards and stuff. People in Springfield don't live like that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something that, you were the speechwriter for George W. Bush I wrote here,
about 3 years.
From 2006 until June 2006, February 2008. That's what Wikipedia says. I hope that's true. Mm. And so can you give us a little bit for Israeli people who just watch the presidents from afar? It seems so, so far from where we are, where everything is like so disorganized. How does a speechwriter work for the president? Can you give us a little bit of behind the scenes and maybe some stories that will be?
Well, I will. First of all, it was the greatest honor of my life to be asked to go. I did not want to work in the government. I did not want to work for the Bush administration. I'm a newspaper man. I just moved back with my family from Hong Kong. Yeah. We were getting settled. I did not want to disrupt them. And the reason I did is we were at war and there were an awful lot of people making sacrifices much greater than mine. And so this was a little thing that I was asked to do. So I did. And it turned out to be great for my family and great for me. It was very difficult at the time. George Bush was, great to my family, my kids, they love him and so forth. When I joined, but at speechwriting, before I left, I was working for Rupert Murdoch here. I was writing speeches for him, in fact.
Oh, yeah.
And the person that put us in touch was Peter Robinson, the speechwriter who wrote Tear Down This Wall, Mr. Gorbachev, for Ronald Reagan. And so he proposed me, he actually got me the job with Mr. Murdoch first. And then the other job came up and he was the one to push me. So before I went down, one of my friends at News Corps was Gary Ginsburg, who worked in the Clinton administration. And he introduced me to a chief speechwriter for Bill Clinton and was telling me about, what it's like. And when he told me, it was very opposite of George Bush. Clinton was very, as you can imagine, free in his style. And he would have, 3 drafts of 3 different speeches in preparation at once. And you never knew is yours going to be chosen. It was just kind of wild, and he could improvise so much. He once said he didn't have the right text in the State of the Union, and he improvised until they got not many people can do that. So he told me a story when Clinton was running for re-election. They went out to Chicago for the convention by train. He had campaign stops, and the speechwriters had a compartment, and they were anxious because Clinton hadn't got back to them on his acceptance speech. So the first day they're getting nervous. He said the second day they still not hearing from Clinton. They started fighting among themselves. I don't know whether it was 3 or 4 days before they got to. They're pulling into Chicago. Not heard a word from the president. He calls this guy up to the limousine to go over a speech on the way into the city. So the guy brings his laptop, and he is taking corrections from Clinton. One of the news networks helicopters saw it, filmed them and said, "Oh, there's the president's speechwriter working on a speech with Clinton." And the host, it was I don't know whether it's Peter Jennings or Tom Brokaw, said, "Let that be a lesson to you, boys and girls. Never put off your homework to the last minute," as though it were the speechwriter's fault. So that going in, Bush was much more disciplined. He had studied speech giving at Yale, the same course John Kerry and Bill Buckley took. And he really had a formula and discipline for how you did a speech and a process. So it was very disciplined because the wartime president, we always had, we had a war speech every week for some reason, bring it up. And he was very focused in his message. You introduce yourself, you tell them what you're going to say, you make 3 points, have a peroration and conclusion. Mm-hmm. And he took it very seriously. And I think he did, pretty well.
Can you give us a little bit of a sense of maybe some stories about some important speeches that you wrote and things that you just noted, interesting tidbits?
Well, one of the probably the biggest speech, like State of the Unions, are big, but they're never remembered, right? Because there are every speechwriting team for every president goes into it saying, "This year we're not going to give a laundry list," and every year they end up giving, because by nature you're selling your program there. The exceptions are if there's a war and declared, then that becomes the dominant issue. The one I can tell you about that probably was most important was the surge speech, the Iraqi surge, and it was in January 2007, I believe, and that's about the time you work on the State of the Union. So my deputy and a team of speechwriters, most of the speechwriters, hived off to work on the State of the Union. And myself and a young speechwriter named Chris Michelle worked on the surge speech. Mm-hmm. Now, remember at the time, no one wanted to hear a surge in troops. Everyone, including the right, wanted to hear we're getting out.
Right.
And Bush wasn't like that. He'd say to me, "Billy, we are not leaving Iraq the way we left Vietnam, from the rooftop of an embassy." So he was determined to win. So we wrote the surge speech, and everyone hated it. And we were under constraints because the counter-revolutionary strategy calls for a 10-to-1 advantage in troops. You're supposed to have 10 times the number of troops
as they have.
They have. Well, we didn't have that many, and not that many available overseas. Petraeus argued that the Iraqi police made up for whatever gaps. So the result was we couldn't use the word counterinsurgency in the speech to describe it. And that's like saying, describe your shirt, but you can't use the word green and tell us what color it is.
Wait, why couldn't you? Because technically
then critics would say, if you're doing that, you don't have enough troops. So all we could say was Petraeus wrote a book on counterinsurgency. That's all we can say. So because of the awkwardness, when we gave the first draft to the president in the Oval Office on a Saturday, he looked at it, and usually the gist of the speech is summed up in a paragraph on the first page, the nut graph or something. And he looked at it. He goes to me, page 1 is awful, but it is not the disaster that page 2 is. And all the people that have been trying to influence the speech tell us they all went for the tall grass. They didn't want anything to do with us after that. So, I said to Chris, who was writing, we know what I know what the problem is. We're giving a counterinsurgency speech without defining the word counterinsurgency, and he gets that something's missing, and he's unhappy with it. Let's just do it the way we would do it if we were left or so we did. And the next morning, Sunday morning, we were again there at 6 a.m. in the Oval. And as they were handing in the speech, I said, Mr. President, yesterday you didn't like page 1. Or you especially didn't like page 2. We took out the part you didn't like. So when you read page 2 now, if you think of it as page 3, it'll go down a lot better. And he looked at me kind of to see if I was, playing with it. I wasn't. I was telling the truth. And after that, it went well. And he got bad reviews on the speech, but I think it held up pretty well. He basically.
And the surge was successful.
Because we won.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing like a victory. We won. We defeated the terrorist forces, and Petraeus carried out a great campaign, and pretty quickly too. So before that, we were trying all political things like get the Sunnis on board and stuff, and it wasn't working.
Can I ask you something about George Bush as president, which I think is interesting if we look at our current leaders? Just we're towards our end of a conversation, so I think it would be interesting. Bush, towards the end of his presidency, was very unpopular in the polls. And yet he continued, like you said, with his policies. So he knew that he was unpopular. He knew that his Iraq war, for example, which you just mentioned, in the end was very unpopular. In the beginning it was. And as it, continued on, more soldiers were dying, being injured. He believed in the mission, and the country seemed to be, like you said, even the right was saying, get out, get out, get out. And he refused because he believed in what he was doing. And so my question is, first of all, was he bitter about being so negatively viewed by so many people in America at the time? And because we have now politicians that they show their bitterness outwardly. I'm not mentioning any names, but right. We hear it, we see it. So it seemed to me that it was always very, very cheerful about being the president. He felt that he was doing the right, at least from someone who didn't know him, just watching TV. So was he bitter about being behind closed doors?
I don't think so. I mean, no one likes being attacked. I do think the surge, though, worked brilliantly, came too late in his administration for him to get any credit. And of course, Obama almost threw it away, right, letting ISIS spring up and so forth. So, I think politically it didn't help him. Look, he not only believed in the mission, he believed that a loss would embolden these terrorists, and he did not want America to suffer the kind of humiliation that Joe Biden put us through in Afghanistan, which is really appalling, because he insisted on that, overrode the advice of his generals, and he did it because he wanted to give a speech on 9/11, saying that he's the man who got the troops out of. So I'm kind of bitter about that.
Me too.
That he did that.
A lot of the weapons.
And I think we're paying for it. And the President Bush was willing to sacrifice his popularity for principle.
Yes. And I'll just say that a lot of the weapons from Afghanistan were used by Hamas.
Right.
And are being used in the West Bank for terrorist attacks. And so, and even in Ukraine, things that are being smuggled into Russia from, the disastrous effect of what happened in Afghanistan is felt almost all over the world right now. Just in the amount of weapons that were left there, it's like unbelievable. You had their first march. Now that
and the results are far reaching. It has an effect on Taiwan.
Yes.
Are we more vulnerable now watching that disaster?
Yeah. Last question, Bill, which I always ask, not always, but lately I've been asking about and it's good because George Bush was called, I remember walking here in Union Square Park when I was maybe 11. And George Bush was right after the Iraq war started, and there was protesters already calling him Hitler. And there was pictures of him with the mustache and it was a real thing. And you had the radical left, which was already starting to become a serious force in American politics, was calling him Hitler and during the Iraq, as the Iraq war progressed, more and more people were calling him a butcher, all these different things. And then after that, John McCain becomes the nominee, and he's the most patriotic, bipartisan. He's always reaching across the aisle. They call him all these names. They call him a racist when he's running against Barack Obama. They call him all these things, which he for sure is not. And then the Republicans pick Mitt Romney, who is like this milquetoast, and Jews would call him parv. He's not milk. He's not dairy. He's not meat. He's down the middle. And they say that he's killing dogs because he's driving them on his roof, and he has binders full of women, and he's a racist, and he's sexist and all that. And I think, do you agree, Republican voters, the base, not the intelligentsia, just the regular primary voter in the Republican Party, looks at all this and he says, we give you the most moderate candidates over the years, and every single one you're calling him Hitler, basically. So you know what? You want a crazy? We're going to give you Trump.
Yes.
Do you think there's a dynamic like that? Because people are saying, we had enough of this. We want somebody who's going to put the middle finger up and going to fight like in the way the left fights us.
Right.
Do you think there's something like that?
What you say is exactly, I was going to say, what you're describing is what went into Donald Trump. What makes his appeal? He's not elegant or smooth in his rhetoric, but people feel he's not going to call me Hitler, and he's going to look out for me. And not only that, he's going to fight.
Yes.
They see other Republicans as not fighting.
Are they right?
Calling. I think they are. I mean, look, a president doesn't want to spend his time getting in an argument with someone that calls you Hitler. It kind of elevates them.
Yes.
I often wonder what they would call Hitler if he came back. Would they call him Mitt Romney? I don't know. They just shout these things. So in some sense, they could see it as demeaning themselves to elevate this person, by shouting back or arguing back at the Hitler or fascist things. But I think that's why they like Trump.
Yeah.
What they like Trump too is not only does he fight, he takes a punch and he loses some, but he doesn't give up. He gets back up and fights again. Yeah. I think that's pretty clear.
I was going to say that I think being the speechwriter for other presidents is probably much different than being for Trump, because his speeches are almost, he'll start on the speech on what's written for him on the teleprompter, and then he'll just go off script for the whole speech.
That's what hurts him. You mentioned before, after he was shot in the ear, the Republican convention came and he said he's changing his speech, and he did. He gave a different speech, but then at the end, he just added the old speech on. And when you choose A, you have to not choose B. Too many times you choose A and B. That's why when I was in the White House, when people would make edits, it'd add all sorts of things. I say, what are you going to subtract?
Yes.
Because less is more and more is less. And I think the Republican convention, he went on over an hour, Look, the 10 Commandments were on 2 stone tablets. The Gettysburg Address was 271 words. no one needs to go on an hour and a half.
Yeah. And people fell asleep during the speech. It was, and also if you would have said, you know, I was shot, I took it for you.
Right.
I'm going to continue fighting. End the speech. He might have won the election at that, but he went on and on, and it was. So I agree with you. And Bill, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll do it again, maybe from far. If you come to Israel when the war finishes, take it easy until then. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. It was interesting. It was thoughtful, and we'll keep in touch. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to our listeners. It was a lot of fun, and we'll see you in our next episode. Thank you.